Ashley Miller packed her bag for a hike by herself through some of Grand Teton's most beautiful canyons, and then she was gone like morning mist. Every weekend, her dad searched the mountains because he wouldn't give up hope, even though search teams only found empty forests and worn-out trails. But almost a year later, while studying golden eagles, a park ranger found something on a narrow mountain ledge that would change everything detectives thought, and show them a nightmare that was hiding in America's most beautiful mountains. The Grand Tetons don't give in. They suddenly rise from the Jackson Hole Valley floor, a rough, broken rock formation against the Wyoming sky. They don't have any slopes to make the climb easier. They are just there, old, sharp, and utterly uninterested. People have been coming here for hundreds of years to test themselves, find comfort, or get a glimpse of its natural beauty. A young woman named Ashley Miller came for all three reasons in the summer of 2023. Everyone knew her as Ashy, but Ashley was 24 years old. She moved with the quiet ease of someone who had spent more time in the wild than in crowded rooms. She moved to Jackson a year before, giving up a bright but unfulfilling career in graphic design for a small apartment, a part-time job at a local gear shop, and a view of the mountains that had always interested her. Her room showed how much she loved what she did. There were topographic maps of the Teton Range stuck to the walls, with pencil lines going through them to show past and future routes. There were pictures of her own hanging next to them, too. There was a bull moose silhouetted in the morning mist of the Snake River, the Middle Teton in full fire, and the sky pilot flower's delicate petals stuck to a rocky outcropping above the trees. Later, her family and friends would say that she was very careful, almost to the point of reverence. She didn't like taking risks or looking for thrills. The wild and art were two things she loved. It was clear that she loved the mountains. She knew that they required planning, being humble, and being very aware of one's own boundaries. She had been hiking by herself for a long time and liked being in the woods by herself. There, the only sounds were the wind, her own breathing, and the camera shaking. She loved that camera, a Nikon D750, more than anything else she owned. It helped her turn the deep feelings the woods made her feel into something real. For weeks, she had been planning her biggest trip by herself yet. Canyon Loop, a 4-day, 3-night hike along the scary Paintbrush Canyon waterfall. It was a standard Teton trail, but it was very hard. It went up and down about 20 miles of punishingly steep hills and over exposed ridges with stunning views. It was more than just a walk for Ashy. It was a journey of faith. It gave her a chance to improve her skills, fully immerse herself, and take pictures that she thought would be the basis of her first gallery show. Chloe, Ashy's roommate, would later remember how she spread out her maps on the living room floor and used her finger to trace the way. Her face lit up by a headlamp. Ashy's expression was one of focused joy. Chloe said she was looking for the best sunrise over Teton. She thought that if she could just get high enough in Paintbrush Divide at the right time, she would be able to get a picture of something that no one else had. In the days before she left, she did a quiet routine to get ready. Susan, her mother, told police later that she remembered their last video call. Ashy was excited as she showed off her well-organized gear that was spread out on the floor of her flat. There was her Osprey pack, the blue fabric that was worn in all the right places, her small cook stove, her light tent, and her down sleeping bag. The woman showed off her satellite phone, a Garmin, and said she would send check-in texts every night. Susan told the story, her voice thick with fresh grief. She was so ready, so responsible. She put her food into Ziploc bags and labeled each one with the day it was for. She had extra batteries for her camera, a first aid kit, and a water filter. There was not a single thing she missed. This careful nature and deep-seated competence are what would later make her absence so hard to understand. She wouldn't normally make a simple mistake. On Friday, August 12, 2023, early in the morning, Ashley's silver Subaru pulled into the busy parking lot at the base of String Lake. The air was sharp and cool, and it smelled like pine and wet ground. The sky was clear and bright blue. The day was wonderful. Before she put her pack on her back, she saw an older couple enjoying the view of the group of cathedral buildings mirrored in the still water. She smiled at them and asked if they would be willing to take a picture of her. The man, Gerald, a tourist from Ohio, was happy to do what was asked. The picture he took of Ashley quickly became the most popular one of her. A happy young woman with her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was wearing a bright pink tank top that stood out against the forest's deep green. She has a heavy pack on her back and a black hiking pole in one hand. Behind her, the majestic and peaceful Teton looms. She smiled as she thanked the couple. Rangers would later hear that they thought she looked incredibly happy and excited. The wife, Eleanor, remembered, "She told us she was going up into Paintbrush Canyon." She said that having this in her backyard made her feel like the happiest person in the world. After they went their separate ways, Ashley went to the shore, where it was quiet, took a big breath of the mountain air, and sent her mother the picture. This text message was the last thing anyone would ever get from her. It said, "Off I go. The mountains want to be reached. The weather is great. We'll talk on Sunday night." After making those changes, she turned around, adjusted her straps, and walked toward the trailhead, disappearing into the lodgepole trees. Light. A single person going out into the vast, empty wilderness. On Sunday, the sun went down behind the rough hills, making the sky orange and purple. For Susan Miller, checking her phone at home in Salt Lake City was like checking for a text from her daughter. At 9 p.m., after some time had passed with no word, she felt the first hint of unease, but quickly pushed it away. Ashley had been through a lot. It's possible that her mobile phone had died. She might have met other walkers and asked to stay the night with them. There were a dozen reasons that made sense, but by Monday night, the reasoning was broken, and a cold, creeping fear took its place. The mountain quiet was thick and suffocating. Voicemail took every call that wasn't answered. The tape of Ashley's happy voice was a heartbreaking echo of her daughter she couldn't reach. Every text message was still unread, with only one grey thumbprint remaining in a dark hole of doubt. Susan knew her daughter. Ashley got in trouble. She cared about others. She would never do anything to make you worry like this. There was a problem. At 7:15 p.m. on Monday, Susan Miller called the Teton County Sheriff's Office, but her hands were shaking so badly that she could hardly press the button. At first, she told the dispatcher what was going on in a cool, steady voice, but when she gave Ashley's name and her planned route, her voice broke. The National Park Service was told within an hour. A ranger was sent to the entrance for String Lake to make sure that her car was there. A report was made that Ashley Miller was missing as the moon rose over the still, immovable peaks of the Tetons. Her name changed from that of a lively young woman to that of a case file, a search grid, and a question that was whispered into the vast, uncaring desert. The official reaction didn't start with panic, but with steps to follow. At the crack of dawn on Tuesday, Park Ranger Tom Albright was standing next to Ashley Miller's silver Subaru. Albright's face was as worn down as the granite peaks he guarded. Just a few days ago, the String Lake trailhead was packed with walkers. Now, it was empty and cool, like dawn. There was a thin film of ochre dust and pollen on the glass of the car, showing that it hadn't been moved in days. Albright took a look. In the cabinet was a travel mug that was only half full. On the passenger seat, there was a folded map of the park. The thing that felt so wrong was that everything looked fine. A quick look at the trail register in the metal box at the start showed that she was there. Paintbrush Cascade Loop by Ashley Miller. 3 nights, result hoped for. Sunday. There was no sign-out that went with it. Albright had worked for the Park Service for 20 years and had seen this happen dozens of times. Most of them ended with a sorry walker coming off the trail a day or two late. telling stories about missing their turn or being stuck by a beautiful view, but as he radioed in his results, he felt a knot of professional worry in his gut. By 8 a.m., that worry had turned into a full-on search and rescue mission. This is the Teton Interagency, SR. The team got together at a homemade command post close to Jenny Lake. The sound of climbing gear, low voices on the radio, and the smell of strong coffee mixed with pine all gave the air a sense of controlled urgency. Lead Ranger Mike Connolly stood in front of a huge topographic map that was stuck to a board. He seemed cool, but his job was very stressful. A bright red line James the Paintbrush Cascade Loop. It was a 20-mile path that wound through some of the roughest scenery in the lower 48 states. "Okay, everyone," Connolly said, his voice rising above the morning talk. "Our subject is 24-year-old Ashley Miller, who has been hiking alone before and is well equipped. On the first night, she was going to camp near Holly Lake. Our main goal is to reach that." Teams were split up. Crews on the ground would walk around the loop twice. K9 groups would be flown to higher elevations and then work their way down. There was already a helicopter in the sky, and the sound of its steady whomps was like a heartbeat in the valley during emergencies. Just after noon, there was the first big clue and the first big plot twist. It was seen by a ground team going up the steep curves of Paintbrush Canyon. There was a small dome tent in the subalpine forest. Its muted green cloth stood out against the natural background. It was Ashley's campsite, in a shady patch of fir trees not far from Holly Lake, just like her plan said it would be. However, the scene was very scary. The stakes were driven deeply into the ground, and the tent was set up properly. Inside, she had spread out her camping pad and placed her small, light day pack next to it. A tube of sunscreen, an empty water bottle, and the paper from a protein bar were all that were inside. Her main backpack, an osprey pack that was heavy and held her sleeping bag, food, and emergency gear, was gone. Also gone were her hiking boots. The scene showed a strange picture. It looked like she had set up her tent, which would be her home for the night, and then, for some reason she didn't know, she put on her boots, grabbed her heavy multi-day pack, and left the smaller day pack behind. It didn't make sense. People who go on short day hikes might leave their big pack at camp, but they would never leave their day pack behind. It went against everything they knew about the backwoods, and it made the search team nervous. When the finding was made, the K9 units were sent to the campsite right away. Kaiser is a German shepherd and the team's most experienced dog. He was brought to the tent flap. He sniffed the ground for a moment, then let out a low whine and ran off. His owner had to jog to keep up with him. Kaiser found a smell trail right away, but it didn't go in the direction that had been James'd. Instead, it went straight away from the path and up a steep, scree-covered slope that was full of willows and dead trees. The team kept going, and with each step, the landscape got harder. After a hard half-mile climb, the path came to a mess of huge granite boulders and tangled, impassable deadfall. Kaiser stopped there. He went around the area quickly smelling, his tail lowered. He whined, turned around to look at his owner, and then sat down. There was no track, that is, not faded or lost, as if Ashley had been pulled straight into the air. It just stopped being there. The manager radioed back to command, and his voice was angry. "This is where the smell ends. It stops. You can't go anywhere." But the K9 teams ran into a wall. Other rangers worked to find the Ohio couple who took Ashley's last picture. They found them getting ready to fly home at a hotel in Jackson. When Eleanor and Gerald heard the news, it broke their hearts, and they were eager to share what little they knew. In addition, they confirmed Ashley's happy mood and excitement. Eleanor then thought of something else. She said, with a focused face, "About 10 minutes after we left her, on the trail, we came across another walker. Someone. He was also by himself." Gerald agreed and nodded. He was an intense-looking man in a military-style pack. He was old and worn out. He didn't look at her. He just kept his eyes straight ahead. Not only did he not greet us back, but he also looked really rough. The description wasn't very clear, but since there were no other leads, it became the main focus. There was a forensic sketch artist brought in, and a combined drawing was made based on what the couple remembered. A man with a thin face, deep-set eyes, and a grim look, who is in his late 30s or early 40s. The dramatic hiker turned into a ghost that spooked the investigators. He could have been a witness or something more evil, but since no one had seen him or given him a name, he stayed just a sketch on a piece of paper. The search chopper kept going in its slow, methodical grid patterns high above. The Teton's huge size looked both beautiful and scary from above. The thick summer cover of the forest looked like a sea of green that went all the way to the ground below. The valleys were deep, shadowy cuts in the ground. Their sheer walls made a lot of blind spots where someone could lie down and never be seen again. There was a lot of silence in the woods as the pilot and spotters looked for a flash of color, a piece of gear, or the glint of metal. The beautiful scenery that Ashley had found so inspiring had turned against the people who were trying to find her. Its size and complexity made it harder for them to find her. The 5th day was the last blow to the first search attempt. Clear blue skies that had been there at the start of the week were gone. In their place came a purple-grey roof of clouds that came in from the west. The temperature went down. Thunder rumbled far away in the canyons and got closer and closer until the storm broke with a scary crash. Lightning shot across the sky like a web, and sheets of cold, driving rain hit the hillside hard. The search was stopped to keep the workers safe. No one was in the field for 36 painful hours while the storm raged. The flood meant something to everyone. Any scent tracks that were still there would be gone. Any fuzzy tracks would be washed away. Already dangerous, the ground would turn into a slippery, risky bog. It seemed like the mountains were trying to get rid of all that was left of Ashley Miller. The search stopped after 10 days, when they only found the empty tent and a scent trail that went to a place that couldn't be reached. Both the people and the money that were available were used up. On the 10th day, Mike Connolly made the call that everyone had been fearing at the evening briefing. He was tired. The busy, large-scale search was being put on hold. As soon as it changed to limited continuous patrol, which is a fancy word for not likely to find Ashley alive, the mission ended. The command post was taken apart. The helpers went home. There was a deep and heavy silence during the process. Ashley's parents were very sad while they were having a vigil in Jackson. James, her quiet father, had spent his whole life surveying land. He stood in the now empty briefing room and stared at the plan. He looked at the red line that showed where his daughter was supposed to go and the huge, empty desert that was all around it. He thought the search wasn't over yet, even though it was over for everyone else. In the Tetons, the seasons changed in a harsh, uncaring way. It was a short show, but the fiery golds and reds of fall blended with the bright greens of summer, painting the aspen forests in impossible strokes of color. In the same amount of time, the first October snow put out the fire. The tops were hidden by a thin layer of grey cloud, and there was a hush over the whole range. It was winter, and there was a silence that felt old and complete. The lively memory of Ashley Miller started to fade with the change of seasons. It turned into something colder and harder, a story, a warning tale, or a ghost. The high-altitude sun washed away the colors on the missing person posters, which used to be very clear and important. They started to curl at the edges in the tourist center. The Park Service offices is now where Ashley's case file is kept. It got thicker with procedural reports and dead-end leads, but it felt colder to the touch. The study was no longer going on. Her name was added to a sad list of people who had died in the mountains, people who had gone into the wildness and become lost in it, leaving behind only questions and an ache in the hearts of those who loved them. The talented photographer who went into Paintbrush Canyon and never left became a piece of modern folklore for the park rangers and people who lived in Jackson. It was told to new seasonal workers and overly cautious tourists. There was one guy whose case never went cold. Ashley's dad, James Miller, wouldn't let the silence win. James was a quiet, precise man who had spent his whole life turning the rough shapes of the earth into the neat, logical grid of a map. He was a former land surveyor. Having his daughter was a stable and important part of his life, and he couldn't understand how she could disappear without a sign. The official search was based on broad strokes and odds, but James's method was detailed and obsessed. He sold a small piece of land he owned to pay for his own search. He gave up a comfortable retirement to go on a lonely, sad journey. The weekends became a sad routine for him. He would take his old Ford F-150, which was packed with measuring gear, climbing gear, and enough food and water to last for days, on the long trip from Salt Lake City to Jackson. The park guards got to know him as a ghostly figure. They would see his truck stopped at trailheads in the middle of nowhere, long before dawn and long after dusk. They showed him quiet respect and cared about him by giving him coffee and warning him about the weather. They knew he was looking for a ghost, but they also saw a father's refusal to give up in the way he was searching. He wasn't just wandering around. He dealt with his sadness with the discipline of his job. He made his own detailed topographic maps by combining geological data with satellite images. These maps divided the huge desert into small, manageable sections. He would carefully search one small square on his grid, a steep drainage, or a clump of trees for days on end, even though the official search may have only looked at it briefly from above. He was looking for something that didn't fit the natural pattern, like a hole in the ground or a piece of colored fabric. He didn't find anything, but his determination grew stronger with each empty square on his map that he crossed off. It was no longer important to find Ashley living. It had to do with getting her home. In the digital world, a different kind of search was going on, while James Miller searched the still or frozen ground. Ashley's case was talked about and debated over and over again in true crime subreddits and backcountry hiking groups, web sleuths, or armchair detectives from all over the world looked into every detail. A simple, terrible accident was the most popular idea and the one that the authorities liked best. She tripped over a loose rock and fell off a ledge. Her body was found in a place that no one could see. A deep crack, an area with lots of bushes, and a spot that the hunters had missed. Others, wanting to make the story more exciting, pushed for an animal attack. They thought a grizzly bear or a mountain lion might have sprung on a walker who was by themselves. But because there was no blood, torn clothing, or dragged James's at her campsite, this idea was hard for most people to believe. A more psychologically complex story also came out. Ashley had decided to disappear. Detectives showed passages from her writings that her family had shared out of desperation. The passages talked about her need for privacy and how she felt disconnected from her old life. They turned her love of the outdoors into a desire to leave society altogether, making it look like she planned her own disappearance. The thread of dirty play, on the other hand, was what made it most interesting. People online made the intense hiker, the guy with the thin face and military pack, into a central figure in their stories about the case. People called him the Teton Phantom and Cascade Creek John Doe. He was like a blank board on which 1,000 dark stories could be projected because he didn't have a name or any proof. Was he a stalker who went after female walkers who were by themselves? Had he followed Ashley from the start of the trail because no one knew what happened? There was a lot of guesswork, and the unknown man became a famous ghost of the Tetons. There was nothing for months. James kept looking for things by himself. The debates on the web forums kept going in circles. Next, in late August 2024, there was a big step forward, or what looked like one. In a rural part of Cascade Creek, several miles downstream from the main search area, a fly fisherman saw something shining under the water and stuck between two big rocks. He got his feet wet and pulled it out. It was a single black hiking stick that leaked. The grip was worn and the tip was scratched. He knew the brand was a famous high-end choice for serious hikers, and he remembered the posters for the missing photographer, so he told the Park Service about his find. The finding gave the cold case a short electric shock. Investigators confirmed that the pole was the exact model and brand that was seen in Ashie's last picture. Her parents were told about it. It hurt to see their hopes rise again. Even better, a specific search team was sent to the area where the pole was found. But the hope didn't last long. Hydrologists said that the pole could have been washed downstream from anywhere in the Tetons because the watershed is so strong and busy. It could have been moved for miles by heavy spring runoff that pushed it off a steep mountain slope and into the creek bed. It was a real piece of Ashie's presence, a heartbreaking echo of the day she died. But it didn't give them a new position or direction. The tip didn't lead anywhere, just like the dog's scent trail. It was an annoying piece that didn't fit, and it made me feel even more like there was a huge, unknown void. They let out one little secret, but all they did was make the quiet tighter around the rest. It was summer in the high country in 2024, and life went through its usual routine. In the alpine fields, wildflowers bloomed in a riot of color. Marmots lay out in the sun on warm granite slabs, and big birds of prey rode the thermal updrafts. Keeping a close eye on the ground below, there was a man among these flying hunters whose love for them would break a year of cold silence. Ranger David Chen had worked for the National Park Service for 15 years. He was a quiet man who knew a lot about the local ecosystem, which won him a lot of respect. But his real passion, ornithology, was more important to him than his job tasks. In particular, he was one of the main experts who kept an eye on the golden eagle population in the Yellowstone ecosystem as a whole. David was looking for nesting spots for the 11th time that summer, 11 months after Ashley Miller went missing. He had to go deep into the Teton Range, away from the well-kept trails and crowded views, for this job. He was in a remote, high-altitude basin with wide scree slopes and steep cliff walls that not many people ever see. He moved with the practiced ease of someone who is used to being in the vertical world. His glasses were like an extension of his eyes. He looked over a nearby cliff, which was a known place for nesting, from a hill. With his powerful binoculars, he quickly found his target, a huge, sprawling nest of sticks and branches perched dangerously on a grassy ledge about halfway up a steep rock wall. It was a standard golden eagle eyrie that was well known and impressive. But as he focused on the picture, he saw something that interested him. Along with the natural browns and greys of the nest, there were flashes of color that didn't belong there, like a shocking piece of bright red and something, a patch of bright blue. His first thought was trash. The Park Service was always having to deal with careless human waste that found its way into even the most remote parts of the forest. David made a choice because he was afraid that plastic and other trash could hurt the birds or their young. He had to clean the nest, even though the climb would be hard and a little dangerous, a tricky scramble up loose rock and steep grass. He put his binoculars over his shoulder, radioed dispatch with his basic location as required, and then started the hard climb. It was hard to climb. He walked on loose scree that moved under his feet and sent small rocks clattering down the slope. He moved slowly and carefully, checking out each handhold as he went. While he was getting closer to the nest, his anger at careless hikers turned into a chilling uneasiness. Now the colors stood out more. The blue wasn't a piece of old rope, and the red wasn't a plastic bag. He finally made it to the edge of the ledge, his heart racing from effort and a sudden, uncontrollable fear. He stood in front of the nest, which was made up of tangled twigs and was about 5 feet across. That's where the things he had seen from below were. They were built into the building itself. The blue fabric looked like it had been torn from an outdoor item, like a stuff sack or a rain cover, and the red was the edge of a pair of dirty, worn-out women's underwear. The elastic waistband and leg openings were a clear, faded red, but the pants were mostly white. At that moment, David Chen's mind went back to the posters for missing people, the many meetings, and the young photographer's smiling face. He remembered the picture of Ashley at the start, with bright red straps on her blue backpack. It was almost an exact match in terms of color. It was cold in his body. Within his very being, he was sure that this was not just random trash. This was a hint. He slowly moved away from the nest. His mind was busy. Taking pictures of the nest and its contents from every angle, he pulled out his service phone while his hands were shaking. He didn't touch anything. He knew that this could now be used as proof in a big case. He radioed his boss, but his voice was rough and strained, which was very different from how cool he usually is. "Hi, this is Chen from Dispatch. I'm at the Upper Basin nesting spot. I think I found something that has to do with the Miller case." The news hit the ranger station like a bolt of lightning. The still, quiet, cold case came shockingly back to life. When David came back with the carefully bagged and labeled things, the police pulled Ashley Miller's file right away. The dirty, worn-out underwear was put on a clean cloth next to a high-resolution copy of Ashley's last picture. The trim on her underwear was an amazingly close match to the red accent straps on her Osprey bag. It was very quiet in the room as people thought about what this meant. A scary new idea started to take shape. One was whispered between experienced detectives who knew how the wild worked on a practical level. Golden eagles hunt for food, but they also eat trash. That smell of death, the meat, draws them in. The most likely and scary idea was that an eagle flying high above the basin had been drawn to the smell of Ashley's blood on her body or on clothes that were lying around nearby. It had landed, torn the fabric, and taken a piece away. It was a bright, strong bit that would be perfect for making its nest stronger. This one strange finding changed the whole investigation. There was no way Ashley could have just fallen into a crack in the park's vastness. It meant that her body, or what was left of it, was probably somewhere on or very close to that remote, hard-to-reach mountain. There was no longer a search for a needle in a haystack over hundreds of square miles. The grid was now as sharp as a laser. The Park Service allowed a new, very specific search based on the eagle's natural desire to build a nest. They weren't just looking for someone who had gone missing anymore. It was their job to find a place. The spark wasn't found by people or technology, but by a bird's ancient instinct to hunt. The bird was like a silent witness who brought a word from the dead back into the world of the living. The first few days of the new search were very serious and precise, very different from the big, hopeful searches that had come before. This wasn't a plan to save lives. It turned out well. A group of experts with specific skills was put together. Their knowledge was used when the worst was thought to be happening. Forensic scientists from the University of Wyoming flew in. They are used to reading stories from bones. They were joined by the best corpse dog teams in the state and search and rescue veterans from Teton County who were experts in high-angle recovery. The team was flown to a staging spot in the basin below the eagle's nest. The rotors of the helicopter created a strong, unnatural wind that blew across the alpine meadows. The air was heavy, and not just because it was thin alpine air. Everyone felt like they were falling. They were walking on holy ground, a very beautiful place that was now the scene of a terrible disaster. The search grid was very small, only 1 square mile, but the landscape was very tough. The hillside below the nest was dangerous because it had steep green slopes, loose scree that felt like marbles on your feet, and sharp rock outcroppings. To be careful, the team moved slowly and in a grid plan. Dogs can feel things much more clearly than people can, so they worked back and forth while their handlers gave them quiet instructions. They were alone in the woods for 2 days and heard nothing. The sun was very hot, and the vastness of the land seemed to make fun of their hard work. But on the 3rd morning, just as there was some question about the plan, Odin, a black Labrador, heard something that was definitely wrong. He stopped next to a thicket of spiky brush and short-knee wind-wavy firs growing at the base of some big rocks. He made a low, harsh whine sound and scratched the ground. This was the last sign he needed to know he had found his target. The team came together right there. Dr. Elena Rios, the forensic anthropologist, got down on her knees and looked around. If you didn't know what it was, it just looked like a patch of rocks and broken ground. But she saw the small signs, the depression in the ground that wasn't there before, and the way the rocks were piled in a way that didn't make sense for natural weathering. She pointed to a spot in the middle of the brush and said, "Start here, slowly, with small trowels and brushes." The team started to carefully take away the rock and soil on top. It took a lot of work. An hour went by. Then one of the searchers stopped because his trowel had hit something hard that gave way. He wiped off the dirt. The arm of a technical shirt was shown as a faded blue piece of fabric. A few inches away, they found another thing, the clear curve of a human bone. With a new, somber focus, the team got to work. Over the next few hours, they dug up a grave that was only a few feet deep. Inside were the bones and skull of a person. The bodies were carefully identified, photographed, and then flown to the county hospital. It was quick to identify the person. Within 24 hours, dental records showed a good match. The body was that of Ashley Miller. When the news got to her parents, it was a confusing and terrible blow. It hurt to know for sure that she had been found, and there was a slight whisper of relief. But the autopsy would show something much worse than a simple hiking accident. Dr. Rios looked at the bones and found several fractures, including a big one on the skull that was consistent with serious blunt force trauma. This wasn't caused by a fall. The way the injuries were arranged pointed to a brutal attack. In addition, trace evidence found with the bodies and later research proved the worst violation. Before she was killed, Ashley had been sexually attacked. The case file was properly reclassified right away. It wasn't a terrible mistake. It was a murder. When it was proven that foul play had happened, the whole case took on a new, scary tone. Every assumption had to be looked at again. The investigators looked again at the first reports, but this time they were looking for evil where they had been looking for accident. The vague account of the intense hiker, which had been their only possible lead up until now, was suddenly turned into the single most important clue. That one picture, which was only a shot in the dark before, was now their only chance. The media were given it again, but this time it was as a possible suspect in a brutal murder, not as a person of interest who might have seen something. People in Jackson and the larger group of online detectives who had been following Ash's case were shocked by the news. The vague puzzle had turned into a real nightmare. The big idea came from somewhere you wouldn't expect it to. Brenda was working at the front desk of a cheap motel in Pinedale, Wyoming, which is a dusty ranching town about an hour south of Jackson. She saw the picture on the local news. It made her feel like she knew what it was as she stared at it. That face was familiar to her. The deep-set, empty eyes, the stern look on his face. She couldn't forget that face. She called the Teton County Sheriff's tip line right away. She told them that the man in the sketch had stayed at her hotel over the summer before. One person E. He paid for his room in cash every week and kept to himself. He said he was in the area to do some holiday building work. The notebook helped her remember his name, Mr. Robert Fraser. She also thought of something else that made her cold. That was the last thing he said before leaving, just a few days after the missing hiker story first came out. Once they had a name, the probe moved much faster. A group of different agencies looked into Robert Bob Frazier's past. He was a homeless 42-year-old with a digital footprint that looked like a ghost. However, he had a sealed youth record for assault. Taking illegal jobs in building and on a ranch, he moved from state to state and never stayed in one place for long. They found out where he went from Wyoming to Montana by comparing his job records and calling labor agencies. It was found out that he was working as a ranch hand on a big remote farm outside of Billings. With a search warrant, a group of highly armed FBI agents and sheriff's deputies from the area went to the ranch early in the morning. Frazier was caught completely off guard and arrested without a hitch. His behavior was flat and lifeless. Investigators found a broken-down military-style footlocker locked with a heavy padlock in the dusty, spiderweb-filled shed where he kept his few things. They forced it open. The box had a Predator's Award in it, some jewelry, a few locks of hair, driver's cards from 3 different women, and other very personal things were found. And at the very bottom, a Nikon D750 camera was wrapped in an old T-shirt. Ashley Miller's serial number was right there next to it, the last piece of proof that proved it was the memory card from the camera. Technicians at the FBI's Regional Forensics Lab looked at the files. The first few dozen pictures were of Ashley's last hike, which took her to beautiful and haunting scenery. The show then went in a scary direction. The last set of pictures was taken by Frazier. They were very detailed and horrifying records of his crime. Ashley was fighting for her life in the pictures, and her face showed that she was scared. They showed the attack. They showed her after she was already dead. It looked like the pictures were cold, scientific, and completely evil. They were an obvious monster's confession and a terrifying look into the last moments of a young woman's life. The questioning room was a clean, empty box, and Robert Frazier's silence filled the room for hours. A seasoned FBI agent and a sharp Teton County officer asked him many questions, but he never answered. He just sat there and refused to answer any of them. His face was like a mask that was empty. He had done this many times before and was sure that without his own words, there was no conviction. It wasn't a clever question that caused the shift. It was the quiet, methodical presentation of facts. The FBI agent walked into the room with a normal manila folder and took a seat. He didn't say anything. He just took out the folder and started putting the glossy pictures on the metal table between them, one by one, in order of when they were taken. The first few were beautiful landscapes taken by Ashley. The first picture Frazier had taken was of Ashley hiking far away, not realizing she was being watched. The next picture was better. Then another. They were arranged by the police like a storyboard, making a quiet, damning account of his stalk. The pictures of the attack finally came out. They were cold, cruel, and impossible to deny. The pictures were put on the table without any words being said. The series of pictures spoke louder than anyone else in the room. Frazier looked at each picture as it was set down on the table. He stopped denying it. The room's air got thick and heavy. According to the transcript of the questioning, he did not say a word for 7 minutes while looking at a picture of the events that led to his crime. The low hum of the room's air conditioning was the only sound. As they waited, the police let the weight of the proof crush him. He finally spoke. He spoke in a low, even voice that was more chilling than any scream. "That's me," he said, almost imperceptibly nodding to a picture of himself. "I wouldn't say that they were guilty. It was just a statement of fact." The wall broke. He began to speak, but not with regret. Instead, he spoke with a distant narrative control. He said he saw Ashley at the entrance and felt drawn to her. He said that he was watching her set up her camp at Holly Lake while following her from a distance. His reflexes to hunt had been trained over many years. In a cold, precise account of the attack, he said that he waited until she took a short walk from her tent to get water. When asked why he killed her, he gave an answer that didn't show any feeling. He said she fought back with a fierceness he hadn't seen coming, so he killed her to stop her. Then he carefully talked about burying her body in the shallow grave and taking her camera as a souvenir of his victory. He then said that he would sneak out of the park at night. When the detective asked him for a more in-depth reason, a why, Fraser looked at them with dead, flat eyes and gave the scariest answer of all. She shouldn't have been by herself. His confession brought to light a past of violence that linked him to at least 2 other Rocky Mountain hikers who went missing without being found. The ghost had a name. The silence knew what to say. It was even worse than anyone thought it would be. The hearing of Robert Fraser did not last long. Together, the horrifying photos from Ash's camera and Fraser's detailed confession helped the prosecutors build a case that was both strong and sickening. People from the town, the press, and the families of the people Fraser had killed were all in Jackson's courtroom. It was a sad gathering. James and Susan, Ash's parents, sat in the front row every day. Their faces were so sad that it seemed like all the light in the room was going out. It hurt them a lot to hear the doctors talk about their daughter's last moments. No parent should ever have to go through that. Fraser stayed calm the whole time. His eyes showed nothing, making him a black hole of humanity. The judges didn't spend much time thinking. All of the charges against him were found to be true: kidnapping, sexual attack, and first-degree murder. The judge's voice was heavy with anger as he gave him a life term in prison without the chance of parole. This meant that the man who haunted the wild places would spend the rest of his life in a steel and concrete cage. Fraser's prize box was found, and it caused problems that went far beyond the Tetons. Along with Ash's camera, driver's licenses and other personal things were found. These were the keys that opened other cold cases. One belonged to a woman who was 28 years old and had gone missing 3 years before while hiking in Colorado's San Juan Mountains. One belonged to a college student who went missing from a trail in Idaho's Sawtooth Wilderness when she was 22 years old. They had been stuck in the same painful limbo for years as the Millers, with only a weak hope of coming back and a deep fear of what the future held. They now knew what to do. Fraser's statement showed where their bodies were found, which helped them get better and brought a painful, long-overdue end to the case. The investigation showed that he was a serial killer who moved around the West, using the beauty and isolation of the mountains as a hunting ground. The decision did what was right for James and Susan Miller, but it did not bring them peace. They would never get over the fact that they knew what happened to their daughter. Afterward, though, they were finally able to get Ashy back home. Instead of a church, they held a funeral service at a lookout point in the park. The cathedral group stood there in silence, their granite bodies standing against the sky. Friends and family told stories about Ashy's lively personality, her contagious laugh, and her love of the mountains. James, her dad, spoke last. His voice, which is generally very quiet, was steady as he spoke to the crowd. He talked about the detectives and search teams and told them how grateful he was. Many people saw him as a hero because he kept looking for the child inside his own home over and over again. But he turned down the praise. He said, "I just did what any father would do." He looked at the hills his daughter had loved so much. "My only goal was to find my little girl." After giving Ashy a proper burial and a final resting place, they began the long, hard trip of grief, a path with no map and no end. The case of Ashley Miller left a permanent James on the people of Jackson and on the minds of people who look for peace in nature. Her story is a scary, constant warning that the wild can be dangerous in more ways than one way. People don't always need to be afraid of the rain, the fall, or the bear. The biggest threat is sometimes someone who looks like a normal person and walks the same trails. The privacy of the backwoods hides a heart that wants to hurt others. The Tetons, majesty and beauty have not changed. The rivers still run clear and cold, the peaks still catch the first light of dawn, and the woods still hide deep, old secrets. For people who know Ashi's story, though, the beauty always comes with a sense of danger.